Hi, do you want a PlayStation? Or an Xbox Series X, I guess? I know I want a PlayStation, but I can't get one. And you can't either. And I want to talk about why that is. I sort of stumbled onto this topic because I am a card-carrying member of the glorious PC gaming master race. The only reason I decided to buy a PS5 is because I'm making a little bit more money at work, and the last console I bought was a PS3 many years ago. And so I thought, I want to play The Last of Us 2. I want to play the upcoming Horizon Zero Dawn sequel. I want to finally play that Spider-Man PS4 game. Okay, time for an upgrade. So just go to walmart.com, judge me if you want, and we'll look up PlayStation. There we go. Okay. Oh, they're out. Oh, well, I heard they're selling them on eBay, so let's check that out. Looking up PlayStation 5. Oh, God. What? Why are the prices so high? Why are the ratings like this? This is seriously sad. The world is becoming such a terrible, toxic place. You guys heard a bunch of rats are going to please do not buy Scalpers. People like this stuff that make it bad for the PS5. Oh. Look, maybe I'm getting old. I understand that this sort of thing is becoming more and more common with highly anticipated consumer goods, but I've just never really thought that deeply about it. I don't crave the latest things like I used to, and I've always pretty much been of the philosophy that buying the first generation of electronics is usually a bad idea. I saw the many problems of the initial rollouts of Androids and iPods. I had more than one friend who bought a Moto Razr only to have it snap in half in the first month. Manufacturers will often release their products with issues, whether they are aware of them or didn't bother to be aware of them, because they know that people will buy them anyway and they can work those kinks out later. Maybe. And while I have heard that the PS5s are having some problems overheating, that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is why, as soon as these things become available, they disappear over and over and over again, and why this can't just be hand-waved as business as usual, or simply supply and demand. And before I get into this, I want to say up front that outside of, say, Twitch streamers and game reviewers who rely on access to the latest consoles in order to make their living, I don't think it's really a big deal that anybody can't get a PlayStation. I mean, it just doesn't really seem all that important when you remember that there are people who can't get food, So what I'm going to talk about is certainly less important, but I think it's indicative of broader problems that I want to talk about. The PlayStation 5 was released on November 12th of this year in the US and several other countries, and worldwide on the 19th. And within that time frame, retailers were given access to certain amounts of stock so that they could release them on a day-by-day basis as a staggered release. And so far, pretty much without fail, as soon as these consoles are made available, they disappear within fractions of a second, only to immediately show up on eBay or Craigslist for 2 or possibly 3 times the price. What is happening is that third-party groups are using bots in order to buy up all the available stock much faster than any individual could possibly click, so that they can turn around and sell them for a pretty big profit. As others have said, they are scalping these PlayStation 5s. For those not familiar with the term, scalping is a concept normally associated with theaters and concerts, back when you could go to those, and people even wanted to go to them. Scalpers would buy up a number of tickets for these events that were either highly likely or guaranteed to sell out, and then stand outside the venues, selling tickets at inflated prices to people who didn't buy them in time. I can only imagine that it's called scalping because it feels like you've had the top of your head cut off and sold back to you. And scalping, not actual scalping, is basically what's happening here, only at a much larger scale and at a blindingly faster pace. According to Business Insider, just one group in the UK managed to buy up 3,500 of these consoles at launch, and that's just one group in the UK. But at the same time, it's not just scalping. But in order to get into that, I'll have to talk about why this is happening. The seemingly simple answer is money. But that's not really an answer, and it's also not simple either. Money is the medium through which all our economic activity happens, and some of that is about comfort and survival, while some of that is about the acquisition of power in the form of property and capital. I mean, that UK-based group who bought up those 3,500 PS5s, probably contains some people who are out of work due to the pandemic or other reasons that have the know-how to set up these bots. In that case, these hypothetical people are probably just trying to make ends meet the best way they can. And while I may question their moral judgment, I won't begrudge them for 1 second trying to put food on the table. But in this case, I'm going to press square to doubt. Not only is this the kind of operation that can be heavily automated, so I am skeptical of the idea that there's a legion of out-of-work coders that's necessary in order to run it, but those 3,500 PS5s cost upwards of $1.75 million to purchase. That is quite a lot of startup capital. I will probably die before I make even that much money in my entire life actually working. Anyone who can drop even a fraction of that amount of money probably has no problem surviving or living comfortably, at least certainly from an economic standpoint. So you'll forgive me if I assume that the people involved in this are primarily motivated by profit. And you might say, well, that's just the way the economy works, dude. And that is exactly my point. At every stage in this process, the groups involved are motivated by profit in a system that is built to encourage profit seeking. So everyone involved is disincentivized from doing anything about this. The scalpers are making money hand over fist, so they're not going to stop. eBay and Craigslist are directly making money from these transactions, so they're not going to stop it. As far as retailers are concerned, they're still selling the consoles and making money, and if they're as big as Walmart.com, it doesn't matter how angry you get. People are still going to shop there. Now, Sony can and will do something, but it'll take time. For right now, they are still selling these consoles and making money, so it's not really hurting them, though hypothetically it could in the long run if enough of these consoles were hoarded that it started to affect sales of games for the PlayStation 5, so they will have to do something about it eventually. They could simply saturate the market with more PS5s, but there are, of course, physical limitations to how many of these consoles can be put out in a given time, and never forget that people are definitely being overworked and underpaid in order to produce them. But those things aside, even if they put out a bunch right now, they could risk oversaturating the market, and console manufacturers remember the 80s and have no desire to relive them. So they'll slowly but surely release more and more of these consoles and eventually meet consumer demand. Or at least that's the way a lot of people like to put it. Meeting demand. But it's entirely possible that what Sony has put out so far is actually enough to meet demand. Because what's going on is not a sudden increase or failure to predict demand, but a sudden drop in supply. Because these scalpers, they're not your granddaddy's scalpers. They're a number of wealthy groups with capital to burn who cornered an entire market so that they could jack up the price. In fact, it's only by controlling nearly the entire supply that they're able to jack up the price as much as they are. They've created artificial scarcity and turned what should be a reasonably priced product for at least most people in my country and turned it into something that costs what I, until very recently, made in a month. And if your response to that is still, that's just how the economy works, dude, then have you wondered why your analysis just kind of stops there? Let's go back to those reviews. If you go down into the positive ones that you'll see on Walmart.com or on eBay even, you'll see a lot of people defending this activity. A lot of people who quote-unquote respect the hustle. And right here I want to make a little moralizing detour. If these people were selling PS5s by, say, taking a replicator from Star Trek and just making copies of them and selling those, I would absolutely respect that hustle. They make their money, more people get PlayStations. The only people who are negatively affected by this are a little bit of lost profits on the part of Walmart.com and Sony, and I really don't care if they lose a tiny fraction of the fuck ton of money that they make. Why would I? I would respect the shit out of that hustle. But not all hustles are created equally. I don't respect this one because the people getting hustled are the people who could barely afford a PlayStation in the first place. And the people doing the hustling are mostly wealthy groups using the riches that they've hoarded in order to restrict the supply and double the price of what is essentially a toy. How much money do you have to have that you corner the fucking market on a toy? But I digress. This section is supposed to be about ideology. So if we want to talk about justifying ideology, there is one prime example that comes up time and time again in these reviews, and that is people defending this by saying, this is just supply and demand. And this statement isn't wrong, of course. It's just kind of stating the obvious. I myself have been talking about this whole situation entirely in those terms. But when I invoke supply and demand, I'm using it to explain what is happening and why, while those who are using it to wave away the concerns and frustrations of legitimately angry people are engaging in a thought-terminating cliche that demonstrates something about the way they're approaching this situation that they may or may not even be aware of. What sounds to them, and to most people who hear it, as a simple statement of fact, is in actuality purely ideological. Carried within the idea that this is just how things work is the belief, whether consciously held or not, that market forces are good, or the way things ought to be, or somehow natural. All those people making angry reviews may as well complain about the sun setting. And these ideas were taught to all of us. Milton Friedman, arguably the 20th century's most influential economist and one of its greatest assholes, conceived of supply and demand in almost mystical terms, as though they were these forces that sought this natural balance but kept getting messed up by people trying to regulate the market. Like people not wanting rivers to catch on fire anymore. And to counter his magical thinking on this subject, I present the situation this video is literally about. His ideas worked great in Chile too, by the way. That's not how any of this works. Markets are not natural. Economies are no more natural than cities. We built them, and we can build them however we want. And we can debate about what's the best way to build a city or build an economy, but we can't claim that there's some purely natural way that they occur. Goods and services do not have to be subject to market forces if we don't want them to be. And distribution of those products does not have to be profit-driven if we don't want it to be. Let me ask you a question. What would you say the purpose of a PlayStation is? You're probably thinking, like I am, that video games are art meant to entertain and stimulate an audience. And if that's the case, then what would you say is the best system of distributing this art? How do we get it into the hands of as many people as possible so that we might have a brief respite from this hell world? How do we build a system that ensures that artists can spread their art to as many people as they can? You know what? I don't know either, but I do know that the one that incentivizes people to deny that art from as many people as possible on a large scale ain't it, Chief. And like I said at the beginning, for the most part, people not having access to a PlayStation 5 is not some life or death struggle. Having this one console is not some necessity, but it is a topical, if small scale, example of artificial scarcity, and the more you think about it, the more you'll see it everywhere. Remember at the beginning of the pandemic when all the toilet paper in the country disappeared? I think we all know that there's enough toilet paper for everyone to have some, and that the only reason that store shelves were empty is because some people could afford to run off with pallets worth of TP, while those who live paycheck to paycheck had to steal napkins from McDonald's and remember not to flush the cob.
If you're out of toilet paper, go to the store, buy some corn to enjoy with your family. But when you're done with the corn, don't throw that cob out. Instead, use that cob to slip it right betwixt your cheeks, all right, and get all that nasty shit out, and then just toss it in the fucking dumpster. Do not flush that cob.
So, in conclusion, 1. The people who are buying up all these consoles are rich assholes who are utilizing technology and wealth in order to buy them all up and inflate their price so that they can make a bunch of money that they don't need, and no one cares but us because everyone is making bank off this. 2. This is not natural or the way things should be. Supply and demand are not magical forces, and scarcity is almost always artificial, a byproduct of a distribution system that prioritizes profit over actually distributing stuff. 3, I just want a PlayStation. I just want a PlayStation. That's so much to ask. And that's it. My super technical and deep analysis of PlayStation scalping has come to an end. So I want to thank my patrons, especially Questing Refuge. Stay safe, stay radical, and gamers rise up. Cheers.